Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. I'm your host, Andy Meadows. Today, we're going to discuss one of my favorite topics, air-checking talent. And I'll walk you through my process for regular air check sessions and the occasional deep dive. But first, I'd like to share the results from our recent polls. Playing off last week's AI Tools I Use Daily Part 1 episode of Radio Influencers, we asked our Weekly Wire readers this poll question last Wednesday. How often do you use AI tools? To my dismay, the number one answer was never with 25.7%. However, daily and weekly were tied for a close second with 25.1% each, and monthly was right behind that with 24%. To those 25.7% still refusing to embrace AI, I would say this: it's not going anywhere, but it's also not too late to learn. Start with one tool, master that, and then move on to another, and each one will get easier to learn as you go. Plus, as you can tell from the poll results, your competitors are using it to be more productive and efficient, so why shouldn't you? Some early results from our Weekend Wire poll. We're recording this on Sunday. Yesterday, we asked, how is your second quarter pacing? Number one answer was as expected with 36.4%. Number two was worse than expected at 33.3%, and better than expected came in third at 30.2%. Now let's talk air check sessions. If you have any questions after watching or listening, email them to me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. I've been managing and coaching on-air talent in one form or another for over 27 years now. However, I didn't really get good at air checking until about 10 to 15 years ago after we brought in a guy as a consultant who would later become my consulting mentor, Tracy Johnson. He's the one who really taught me how to effectively air check talent, and I've been honing my process for doing so ever since. Coaching everything from veteran on-air talent to newbies cracking the mic for the first time in all different size markets. Here's my process for air checking talent. If you'd prefer to read it, I wrote an article on my process for air checking talent that's on my consulting radio website, radiostationconsultant.com, and on radioupdate.com. In it, I discuss why there's a stigma around air checking because many veteran on-air talent have had some really bad experiences with air checks from people who frankly didn't know what they were doing. Sadly, some programmers use air check sessions as an excuse to dress down the on-air talent and point out every single thing on God's green earth they're doing wrong. Some do it because they're frustrated with the talent. Others do it because they think it will thicken their skin and prepare them for the judgment they'll get from the audience, clients, and coworkers every single day. The problem is it doesn't work. Talent shut off pretty quickly, and it kills any hope of coming up with anything creative they can use on air in the next coming days. So here's what I do instead. My approach varies depending on several things: format, market, how long the show's been working together, if it's a team show, how long they've been in radio, which often varies wildly with individuals on team shows, and their personality type, which is a whole other conversation for another day. One of the main things you're trying to determine when you're managing or coaching anyone in any position really is their personality type, so you can adjust how you manage and coach them accordingly. With all that said, here's the basic structure for my air check sessions. I listen to a full show's worth of audio, varying up the day each time, and a few key bright spots or trouble spots from other days during the week. I use a web-based service called Audio Logger to make that process significantly faster than how we used to do it in real time, or by asking the talent to send you their own audio, which, by the way, tends to result in them sending you the very best stuff. And on shows that struggle with break length, their shortest content breaks from that week. So that's not usually the best way to do it. Then I make detailed notes because you should never wing it during any staff meeting, much less an air check session, because you're coaching people who are paid to talk and they will absolutely take over or filibuster during the meeting. So you have to have a clear-cut agenda or it will go off the rails 9 times out of 10. Doing this also allows us to meet for no more than 30 minutes on the regular air check sessions, so it's not taking up too much of anyone's time. Within the meeting, I always start by highlighting multiple things they're doing well. Some are big, some are small, but they're all true. I never praise talent for something that's untrue just to find something good to say, because that reinforces bad habits. I just dig until I find something, which is why I pull a lot of audio. Then for most shows, but not all, depending on where we're at in the development of the show, I choose one piece of audio for us to listen to that's either good or needs a little work. But either way, I ask them what they think before I say anything after we listen to the audio. There's a reason for that. A, I'm trying to teach them to self-analyze, which we'll come back to in a bit. B, I've found these meetings work much better if they're interactive instead of a lecture. So throughout, I encourage the talent to participate, but use my notes to kind of keep us on track. C, they often say something in their analysis that leads into my point, which makes it land a lot better. Then I give my feedback on the audio we listen to and transition to anywhere from 1 to 5 things they need to work on, depending on the talent or show and how quickly they need to improve based on our timeline. How I word these things to work on also vary from softly to bluntly, depending on their personality type. Finally, I end every AirCheck session with a brainstorming session where I throw out a few content ideas tailored for their show, market, and format for them to consider, and I ask them if there's any content they're working on for the next couple of days. This encourages them to pre-plan their shows further out and dig deeper and develop their content more, but it also is the most fun part of the meeting by far, because it eventually starts to feel like a writer's room where we're all kicking around creative ideas. Plus, it gives them something tangible they can take away from every meeting and use on air. On the rare AirCheck session where we're having to address some major disciplinary thing for something they did that put the company in harm's way, we sometimes skip the brainstorming part and I just email some ideas because it usually doesn't work at the end of those kind of meetings. Deep dives. Once per year or per quarter, I like to do deep dives with shows that are a little different from the regular AirCheck sessions. These generally take 45 minutes to an hour, so I always plan on an hour for a deep dive. On these, everyone involved in the show, the talent, producers, if there are any, the programmer, etc., everyone listens to an entire show's worth of audio on their own, which is important to stress, by the way, and makes their own notes. They all send them to me ahead of time so I can compile them and focus on the things where we have a consensus, which surprisingly happens a lot more than you would think, especially after you've been working with the show for a while. Then we get together for that 45 to an hour meeting and go over the results. It's a great way to see if we're on the same page or miles apart, and it's also a great way to evaluate features and benchmarks that may need to be tweaked or eliminated entirely. Benchmarks are great, but filling up an entire show with benchmarks is a bad idea and tends to happen to shows that have been on the air for a long time with little or no supervision. It also encourages talent to learn to air check themselves, which is an important skill. Self-analysis. That's why when I'm coaching talent, trying to teach them how to analyze their own audio is one of the main goals, even if I work with a show every single week, which is happening less now with budget cuts, of course. We still are only going to discuss a handful of breaks each week, and usually on morning shows, we just listen to one break together. That's just a small fraction of the 12 to 16 times most talent crack the mic every day. So if they want to get better exponentially faster, it's important that I teach them how to self-analyze by encouraging them to regularly listen back to their own audio on their own. This helps them get to a point where they're hearing the same things I am a lot more quickly, which makes them much easier to coach. Plus, it prepares them for air checking other talent later in their career should they move into a program director role. In my opinion, that's one of the main reasons we have such an air checking void right now in radio. group after group and market after market, regardless of size, I keep meeting on-air talent who haven't been air-checked in years, and some who have never been air-checked at all, despite being in the business for a decade or longer. That's because talent that aren't air-checked turn into programmers who don't know how to air-check, and the cycle continues. The other reason is some programmers don't think it's necessary to air-check talent at all. I've heard it said that air-checking is outdated, which is ridiculous. We don't get better at this on accident. The people at the top of our game got there by really studying and working on the craft of radio. And they all had great mentors and coaches along the way that helped them get there. All talent should be air-checked because our performance is not judged in a vacuum. It's judged against the performance of others, many of whom are constantly evolving and growing. So in this business, if we're not getting better, we're slowly getting worse in comparison. What do you think? How important are air checks? How often do you do them? What are some techniques that have worked for you? If you're a current or former on-air talent, what are some good or bad experiences you've had being air-checked? Email them to me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com and let me know. As always, if you have some thoughts you'd like to share on this or any other hot radio topic, submit an article about it by emailing submissions@radioupdate.com. Thanks for listening, watching, and reading. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Radio Influencers. Radio Influencers is a Radio Update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.